Hello from Bloomington, Indiana. Indiana is the ancestral homeland of the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, and Shawnee people who we honor as past, present, and future caretakers of this land. I am Diane Dallas, Commentale Ruth Lilly Dean of University Libraries for Indiana University, and I welcome all of you to this international celebration of Chris Mortenson's fascinating exploration of impossible figures using an extensive archive acquired by the Lilly Library in 2014. In a moment, we will be hearing from Professor Mortenson about the book, and later there will be a chance for everyone to ask questions in an open session moderated by Lilly Library Director Joel Silver. The Impossible Arises is part of a special publication series at IU Press intended to increase the impact of one of the world's greatest libraries, the IU Libraries system, including the Lilly Library. Together with IU Press and the Lilly Library, we partner with scholars like Professor Mortenson to inspire and support research which delves into these rare and sometimes surprising primary source materials, and then publish and share new knowledge with the world. I now have the privilege of introducing someone who shares this vision with IU Libraries and IU Press. It is simply, well, impossible to overstate the impact of his appreciation for the mission of our libraries and his personal efforts towards launching academic libraries into the digital era. So I am very pleased to introduce our special guest, Indiana University Chancellor and President Emeritus Michael A. McRobbie. As many of you know, Chancellor McRobbie served as the 18th president of Indiana University from 2007 to 2021. A native of Australia, Chancellor McRobbie came to the United States in 1997 to serve as IU's first vice president for information technology and the chief information officer for the university. Chancellor McRobbie is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He has served on numerous national boards and committees, including serving as chair of the board of directors for the Association of American Universities. As reflected by his leadership, such major efforts at Indiana University, such as the $27 million Media Digitization and Preservation Initiative, which is in fact the largest university-led media digitization project in higher education. Chancellor McRobbie has been a longtime champion of the IU libraries and the importance of IU's collections as among the many universities' most precious and vital educational research and scholarly resources. Thank you for all you have done for the IU libraries, including the IU Press, and thank you for being here tonight, Chancellor McRobbie.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, Diane, which I appreciate very much. And it is a great pleasure to add to your welcome, to welcome everybody here tonight to this virtual event to celebrate the official launch of Emeritus Professor Chris Mortenson's wonderful new book, The Impossible Arises, Oscar, Reutersvärd, and His Contemporaries. And it is a very special pleasure to do so, as Chris is one of my oldest friends. I have known Chris and his wife, the eminent art historian, Professor Kathy Speck, who's also on this call, for nearly 50 years, dating back to January of 1974, rather memorable event in January 1974. Chris has a long and distinguished career as a philosopher and mathematician, primarily at the University of Adelaide until his retirement in 2005. But I use the word retirement advisedly, as Chris has remained just as professionally active since that date as he was before it. He also spent a number of shorter periods at the Australian National University while I was there, and I'm sure we both remember the memorable logic seminars held there, where some of the themes explored in Chris's book were first seriously explored. The Impossible Arises is at one level a long overdue corrective to the view that it was Maritz Cornelius Escher around the mid-1950s who founded the Impossible Figures movement and the artistic representation of such figures. In fact, Chris is able to demonstrate indisputably that it was in fact Oscar Reutersvärd nearly 20 years earlier who did so thanks to the superb Reutersvärd collection that IU's wonderful Lily Library acquired. Chris's book is as well liberally illustrated with many of Reutersvärd's images rarely seen before, as well as images from other members of the Impossible Figures movement. But that is only, as I said, on one level. At a deeper level, Chris's book is a sustained analysis of the concept of contradiction and consistency, illustrated by the art and philosophical and psychological ruminations of Reutersvärd and others. Chris says, the main philosophical message of this book is that the human imagination escapes not only the possible, but even the logically consistent, that humans play with contradictory concepts without intellectual collapse. And he elaborates on this later in the book, where he ends this chapter on Mcesho by concluding, we can say that our minds have contradictories among their contents, whereas in contrast, it can be argued that the contents of the world are no more than consistent states of affairs. In short, our minds contain more than the world contains or could possibly contain. Our minds transcend even the possible. And he stresses that none of this implies any ontological commitment, that is, commitment in the real or physical world to impossibility. In many ways, then, this book can be seen as bringing together some of the main intellectual problems with which Chris has wrestled and on which he has published during his long career. The problems of consistency and logic, mathematics and geometry, and the inadequacy of the classical Boolean account of this, cognition and mental representation, and the fundamental problems of aesthetics of what constitutes art. Mind you, even this wide spread of intellectual fields does not do justice to the remarkable breadth of Chris's intellectual interest, encompassing other fields such as the philosophy of space-time, ancient Greek philosophy, Buddhism, and the philosophy of the martial arts. So again, I'm delighted to be the host for this event to mark the official launch of The Impossible Arises, and with all of Chris's colleagues and friends, congratulate him on yet another splendid intellectual and scholarly achievement. And let me also congratulate the Indiana University Press and its director, Gary Dunham, on the publication of this fine book that continues to uphold the long traditions of publishing excellence. And let me also thank most sincerely the IU Libraries, Dean Dallas Commentale, and Lily Librarian Director Joel Silver for their great foresight and support in acquiring the papers and artwork of Oscar Reutersvärd, continuing IU's great scholarly traditions in the arts and humanities. And with that, I believe I hand it over to Chris, and he starts his comments and his remarks and his presentation.
Thank you very much, Michael. Now, my part of the story begins in the mid-1990s when I was working in a new field in consistent mathematics. In 1995, I published a book of that title. As I neared finishing the book, I came to be uncomfortably aware that there was a big gap in my treatment, namely geometry. I was dimly aware that there are examples of strange paradoxical figures which cry out for mathematical treatment. So I began to keep an eye out for cognate images. I sought advice from a friend, the psychologist Michael White, he of White's illusion. Michael gave me 4 names. One was the Dutch artist Mcesho. A second was the Swedish art historian Roger Reutersvärd. A third was the English mathematician Roger Penrose. And a fourth was the Dutch artist and mathematics teacher Bruno Ernst. Ernst, it seems, was the last surviving student of both Escher and Reutersvärd. Michael also showed me Ernst's book, The Eye Beguiled, 1986. So I contacted Ernst. He in turn referred me to another of his books, The Magic Mirror of Mcesho. Of these 2 books, the former is a wonderfully detailed survey of a group of late 20th century artists referring to themselves as impossibilists, and to their work as IF, short for Impossible Figures. A central name in this group was that of the Swedish artist and art historian Oscar Reutersvärd. The latter book was an equally wonderfully detailed account focusing on the work of Mcesho. But look, these are great works, but where was the geometry? So with the assistance of a grant from the Australian Research Council, I applied myself to writing a sequel book, Inconsistent Geometry, 2010. To cut a long story short, an explanation of an impossible image came in 3 parts. First, there was an inconsistent theory representing the contents of one's mental state in describing the image. The proof of inconsistency amounts to a proof that the image does not represent any real-world object. Second, there was an appeal to whatever psychological mechanism enables the parts of the inconsistent theory to be pasted together into an impossible whole. For example, in pasting together the parts, one postulates that parts of a viewed object that are close in angular distance are radially close. Now, that's just one bit about how we appreciate these images. This enables a viewer to take a specialist viewing position in which key parts look joined up when they cannot possibly be joined up. This enables a viewer to take a specialist viewing position in which key parts look joined up when they cannot be possibly joined up. Yes, in this way, a consistent physical world affords us inconsistent content for our images. Thus, the inconsistent theory is seen to be an amalgam of parts initially pulled apart. Now, in the course of this work, I became aware that impossible figures had a history of dispute with a theoretically loaded terminology. First and foremost, there was a question of historical priority. Here, people took firm positions. A majority credited Escher as the great discoverer, a notable example being the critic Richard Pybus. A slightly better informed group credited Escher in collaboration with the mathematician Roger Penrose and his father, the psychologist Lionel Penrose. Some, including Ernst, gave priority to Reutersvärd. Who is right? Oscar's role in the part of the story has it that one day in 1934 in Stockholm, aged 18 and bored in his high school Latin class, he drew the first impossible triangle, Opus 1. Sorry, I just got to, that's it. There we go, that's Opus 1, 1934, Oscar Reutersvärd. Gaze at it in awe. Now, for comparison, in 1954, Roger Penrose was attending a mathematics conference when the dogmatic scales dropped from his eyes on perceiving some of Escher's work. He took the insights home to his father, where they worked for a good couple of years before submitting to the British Journal of Psychology. And here we have an Escher, 1957. Look at the little man down on the left-hand side holding a cube-like figure. Okay, that cube is actually an impossible object, and I'll show you in more detail in a bit. But there you have. Now, notice, of course, the top of the Belvedere is quite remarkable with things inside and outside when they shouldn't be there. So that's all impossible. Another Escher, 1960, ascending and descending. Look at the stairs on top of the building. The monks are all going up one way or all going down the other way. And that's, of course, impossible also. Now, here's the Penroses, and the Penroses and Escher freely admit that they heavily influence one another. So here's the Penroses perspective drawing, and this is sometimes called the Penrose Triangle. But no, Oscar got there first with this one. There's no doubt about it. So there's the Penroses in the British Journal of Psychology, submitted 1956. The dates matter, obviously. And here's another Penrose, continuous flight of steps. And again, just look at the steps. They go down and down and down and down and down and down, or up and up and up, depending how you look at it. Again, this is the Penrose's continuous flight of steps. All right. Now, Who gets the priority here? Well, pretty clearly, Oscar was ahead of the game in some sense. The question of priority is bound up with the question of classification of different themes or types. Given to artists, if one employs themes that the other one does not, then the former must be credited with the greater priority. As an example, here are several schematized images which are descriptive of impossible images. Now here, if you look at this, the top row were all by Reutersvärd. With the top left-hand one, of course, Reutersvärd broke it up into cubes, whereas the Penroses made it all smooth again. But the second one is again Reutersvärd, and it's a stairway. Down on the bottom left-hand corner is the cube that Escher had in his hands in the picture of Belvedere. There, okay. All right. And on the bottom line, on the right-hand side, is a piece by Bruno Ernst. But this is 5 basic forms. The top right-hand is sometimes called the fork, but it's also sometimes called the meander. That's right. I'll get to it in a moment. Okay, wait a minute. So, while I was pondering these questions, I had a great stroke of luck. Bruno Ernst wrote to me informing me that he had in his possession an extensive archive of Reutersvärd's letters, drawings, and other publications, some 1,773 pieces, sent to Ernst over several decades. And did I know of anyone who might be interested in purchasing this archive? The condition was that the archive was to be kept safely and together. I nearly jumped out of my skin. An art historical gold mine. My first thought of a purchaser was myself, but the quoted price, while not excessive, was too much for me, and the archive was difficult to keep together and safe, which was the condition that it be purchased. My second thought was the libraries of the world, including the Bar Smith Library at the University of Adelaide. We, that is my wife, Professor Catherine Speck, and myself, happened to be visiting Bloomington at that time, 2011, and I told this story to President Robbie. Such an archive would fit well into the section of Escher games and puzzles in the Lilly Library. And look, if you're here and you haven't seen what's in the Lilly Library and it's accessible to you, rush out immediately after this meeting here and have a look at what's in the Lilly Library and the Escher acquisitions that they've got, because there's something to be proud of. Anyway, we told the story to President Robbie. He had little hesitation in consulting his advisors and putting forward Indiana U as a purchaser. We returned to Bloomington in 2014, and by which time the sale was completed. We were able to get a first look at the archive with the aim of writing about it. What we saw was many and varied, and I'm going to show you about 20 of these images, and I'll have to go reasonably quickly because we don't want to take too much of your time. But here we go with all the pictures. Now, every one of the pictures that I'm about to show you is in the book. So here we go. Now this is triangle-like, so you need a little bit of friendly persuasion that some of these are exactly right, but this is triangle-right. This is equally triangle-like, and you can see the triangles going in strange directions from one another in the course of this. Another that's triangle-like. Well, just look, it's triangle-like. Triangle-like. So far, we're still going on triangles. Notice, by the way, the variety that Reutersvärd is able to get into all this. It's quite remarkable that how different he manages to extract the theme of being triangle-like out of these images. Again, something truly remarkable. Triangle-like, it's got 4 sides rather than 3, but triangle-like it is. Now, in 1982, the Swedish government honoured Oscar Reutersvärd with an issue of their stamps, and that's an issue of a stamp in which Opus 1, the triangle, is the key feature. Okay, still on. Now, this is a stairway, and it's earlier than Mcesho, of course, and it's very clear there's something weird and paradoxical about that. Now, that's a stairway of magnitude proportions, and look at it, it's truly quite remarkable. Down and down and down and down and down and down and down until you come back to the same place. Yes, indeed. Extraordinary. How did he think of that, I wonder? Another stairway going on one level from one part to the other. Another stairway going in little swirls at this time. And this demonstrates, by the way, that Mcesho was not Mcesho, Reutersvärd was busy showing his work around the place, and that's the Gallery Krakerslat, for example. Now we come to the fork, also known as meander, and meander is probably a better name for it because that is also a meander, and it's not really fork-like, but it has the same characteristic as this, the one you saw a moment ago, which has basically missing an edge. And here, this guy is similarly missing an edge. So probably better called meander rather than the fork. Okay. More fork. This is a combination of a fork and Opus 1. This is pretty impressive. The one on the left and the one on the right-hand side are both fork-like. The one in the middle is an amalgam of the two, so it's in some sense more inconsistent than the one on the left and the one on the right. Now here we have a group of images that are sometimes called the squeeze, which it wasn't up in the pictures that I showed you a moment ago. It's called the squeeze because there's something fatter or bigger going through something that's smaller, and it's called the squeeze. I like to call them the Tardis paradoxes because everybody knows that the Tardis is bigger on the inside than on the outside, and so we have here a sketch of something that's bigger than the inside than on the outside. Tardis is very nobly described. Okay, more squeeze Tardis, where the thing going through the slot at the top is bigger than the slot itself. Impossible, indeed so. This is triangle-like. This is triangle-like also. Again, a poster from a show that he was obviously had in 1985. Another triangle-like image. Now, this is just to show you that Oscar was not a boring old creature who just did impossible pictures. Here's the loves and vengeance divine among the Egyptian myths. And obviously he's got a show going on in Paris in 1977. I just thought you'd be entertained by looking at that one, needless to say. And here finally we have a photograph of Oscar taken when he was, that went onto his funeral card, and that was dated 2002. Now I'm going to okay. Now we still no. I've got to sort first. Now we returned to Bloomington, by which time the sale was completed. We were able to get a first look at the archive with the aim of writing about it, what we saw with many and varied. Yes, I had that one. First, there was a dating following a reliable annual pattern and including various public events such as exhibitions of Reutersvärd's works. Just go back to the previous one. Thanks, Lou. Second, there was an essay on Oscar's work attributed to the authorship of one Carlo Bresti. Such an author does not appear anywhere in the collection. And moreover, on inquiry, Bruno Ernst did not know of him. Interestingly, the letters and the name can be rearranged into Oscar's wife's name, which is a typical piece of Reutersvärd anarchy. So he provisionally accepted the essay by Oscar. This had the advantage that the essay contained a number of philosophical conclusions about Oscar's work, which I was able to address in the new book, The Impossible Arises. For example, there's the concept of illusion. This terminology is nearly ubiquitous, including Bruno Ernst and the Penroses. They all call them illusions. Yet Oscar denied it. Well, what then is an illusion? I adopted a working definition by the noted psychologist R.L. Gregory, quote, systematic visual and other sense discrepancies from simple measurements with rulers, photometers, clocks, and so on. Psychologists study illusions for clues to the workings of the brain. Gregory was able to break his definition up into some sub-classifications, a clear example being the well-known Muller-Lyer illusion and another being the impossible figures. Now, it must be conceded that inconsistent illusions can be generated from consistent content. The exciting thing is that the consistent world so affords us. There exist photographs obtained by lining up the camera so that the parts of the objects lined up by the camera looked joined up. The geometrical content looks joined up and therefore it looks impossible. But this is not the whole story. In the interest of clarity, I put it to you that Opus 1, Reutersvärd's Opus 1, did not have to be generated like this. Oscar just made it up. He wasn't taking bits out of the world, he made it up. There was no discrepancy or error, nothing hidden, no illusion. It's simply impossible that such a thing exists. Another widely misused concept with a long history is that of paradox. Thus we have Zeno's paradoxes, the liar paradox, Russell's paradox, and many another. As philosophers use the term, it means something like, quote, a pair of arguments in words with incompatible conclusions where it isn't clear which of the pair of arguments is unsound. Thus, Russell's paradox of the Russell set, the set of all sets that are not members themselves, is a member of itself if and only if it is not a member of itself. That's a contradiction. But in the impossible figures tradition, we have people referring to Reutersvärd's triangle as paradoxical. Fair enough, but where are the verbally expressed premises? In short, the pictures in the archive are a large collection of paradoxical images calling out for a revision of our concept of paradox. And that's part of the importance, I think, of the collection that the universities obtain. Now, the contents of the archive generate controversies. I've already mentioned historical priority. OsCAR claimed to have gotten there first. Escher and the Penroses were seemingly unaware of him. It is, of course, possible to discover things independently. Witness Darwin and Wallace. This is not such an easy explanation, however, given that we saw that Reutersvärd wrote twice to Escher in the early 1960s without reply. Reutersvärd wrote to Escher a couple of times, and Escher didn't reply. A supporter of Escher and Company, the critic Richard Pybus, published a denunciation of OsCAR in the 1980s in the art magazine Kunstperspektiv, in which he accused OsCAR of being a liar and, quote, a boundless mythomaniac, unquote. Lovely bit of abuse that. OsCAR replied vigorously, and the sparks flew, including a court case for plagiarism. But scrutiny of the archive makes it clear that OsCAR was exhibiting before Escher was producing his impossible figures, the latter being in the late 1950s. So he can rest more easily on OsCAR's side of the matter. Still, this leaves unexplained Escher's failure to respond to OsCAR's two letters. Bruno Ernst suggests that OsCAR might have got a less ill-mannered response if he had included some of his own artworks. We leave this with an open finding. OsCAR was an unusual character, as the archive made clear. He knitted dual garments to be worn by couples on bicycles or motorcycles. He made his wife's clothes. He liked to dress up as an astronaut and occasionally liked to adopt new names. When a new idea for an impossible figure was on the way, he reports that he'd get the shakes. Overall, we are left with the pictures of one whose genius is not so far from their madness. To sum up the findings of the impossible arises, OsCAR Reutersvärd was the first to draw a new kind of paradox, the impossible figures, some 20 years ahead of the opposition, including Escher and the Penroses. He generated several basic or irreducible kinds of impossible figure, including the triangle with stairs and the fork. The paradoxicality of these figures does not consist in their having verbal content, as historically paradoxes have been, but arising from their non-verbal content. Nor should they be inevitably regarded as illusions. In contrast, and they do not necessarily arise by consistent objects affording them inconsistent perceptual content at all. Rather, OsCAR and his contemporaries simply made up their images. In short, our minds have contradictions among their contents. Our minds contain, or could possibly contain, more than the world contains. Our minds transcend even the logically possible. Thank you very much. There you go. I hope you like the pictures. They're pretty amazing.
Terrific.
They truly are, Professor Mortensen. So I want to thank everyone who could join us today. Some of us are wrapping up our days, others are just getting started depending on where you are in the world. And no matter where you are in the world, please know and remember that you are welcome in Bloomington, Indiana. I want to thank Professor Mortensen for his incredible presentation, these elegant and beautiful images he shared today and that are in the book are really inspiring. And for what it is worth, I have children, both 15 and 11, who were taken with this book as well. And I mean that as a compliment. It's very difficult to, to excite young people sometimes, but this book did. And I just want to, it's really a privilege that Professor Mortensen had such a great experience with the Lilly Library. And
Oh, yeah.
this is just lovely. And I
Absolutely.
hope to have all of you to come and have a similar experience at the Lilly Library and see what kinds of feelings and thoughts and inspirations that you might experience. So in closing tonight, I want to thank, Chancellor McRobbie for his inspiring curiosity on the topic of impossible figures, and everyone at IU Press who made this book a reality, including our editors, graphic designers who produced such a beautiful collaboration, and especially Lilly Library Director Joel Silver for his always insightful contributions to the discussion tonight, and for his long time leadership at IU Libraries. And now I'm going to turn it over to Joel so that he can start the conversation and the Q&A.
Thank you, Diane. I just wanted to start first by thanking Professor Mortensen. And I'll start with a question of my own. Before you came to the Lilly Library to work with the Reutersvärd archive, you had certainly seen a description of the archive. I mean, you had seen the description that the seller of the archive had. Did that really prepare you for what you saw when you actually began to go through the archive?
No, the archive is remarkable. It's extraordinary. 1,773 pieces in that archive. I showed you about 40 then. And so it's just a remarkable input. Some of it's letters, of course, and Reutersvärd and Ernst were good friends with one another, and corresponded quite regularly. But it's huge. It's not, doesn't look physically big. 1,773 slots in an archive is not all that large, surprisingly enough. But they're all there, and they're just truly remarkable. What can be found in there, and you'll find a list somewhere in the end of the book of some of the places that you can go to in the archive in order to see the originals.
Yeah, I think the archive is contained within something like 4 boxes. But
That's right.
once you open these boxes, it's almost like impossible figures themselves. I mean, there's so much material in there that can lead to other thoughts. One question that has come up in the Q&A is, why do you think Escher became well known in popular culture, a household name around the world, and Reutersvärd didn't?
Anybody who walked into a hippie party in the 1970s would know how to answer that question. Of course, there's walk into the hippie library and you inevitably find an Escher or two up on the walls. So that's one thing. But Escher and the Penroses had a better public relations operation going. I think that's the other part of it all. Penrose, of course, is a very famous mathematician. And let me say something here. I have a very high opinion of Escher. I mean, Escher loses out in this argument for priority, but Escher's work himself has been just remarkable. And so partly the reason why it's called on is just because Escher was very good, very extraordinary. Yeah.
And moving on from that, another question that considering Reutersvärd's influence on the Impossible Shapes movement, and also his subsequent influence on Penrose, do you think that the Impossible Figures movement ultimately influenced Penrose's future thinking on general relativity and cosmology?
I asked that question. Bruno Ernst thinks not. I'm trying to think when Penrose. The short answer is I don't think so. The the stairway that the Penroses drew is just something a bit different. That's all. And so I don't think that it influenced general relativity. It'd be nice to think so, of course. That's art life appreciating art and so on. But no, I don't think so.
You've seen a lot of Reutersvärd pieces, a lot of his drawings, a lot of his other artwork. There was a question that one of the participants have asked, which is your favorite Reutersvärd piece and why?
That's an interesting question. I got to say, I think Opus 1 is my favorite. It is just simple and clean and absolutely, and he made it up, as I keep saying. And so if you put me on the spot, forced choice, I think the first one, Opus 1, is probably my favorite. But he did so many, and they were so interesting and there's such variety. I think that's the other part of it all. So yes.
Another question from one of the attendees is who very much enjoyed your talk. Another psychological concept might be relevant here: hallucination. From what you've said about Reutersvärd, I wonder if this might have something to do with his figures.
First of all, he hallucinated Opus 1, then he drew it. Why not? How is art? How is art created? I mean, that's a question for my wife. But she's not willing to commit herself to an answer to that question. Whatever it is that enables art to be produced, I think, and if hallucination is part of that, then so be it. Yes.
And I know you spoke earlier, and you certainly talk about it in the book, and you alluded to it here about the other figures you mentioned, talking about the but Reutersvärd not thinking in those terms.
No. Well, illusion somehow or other, you're given a wrong steer from a phenomenon in the world. I think that's how illusion gets going, and that's not quite what somebody who just makes it up does. That's more like an hallucination, I think. So it's partly what you think about is the difference between illusion and hallucination that will give us a clue to an answer to that question.
What pieces of evidence in the story are still missing? What do you still hope to find out there somewhere?
Well, indeed. Again, hard question. This is not the only place where Reutersvärd's works are collected. There's also Lund University has got some there too as well. And so an assiduous scholar could go and look at that group of pictures, and that would be that would give some sort of clue to what's going on, I suppose. But really, we're trying to understand extreme creativity on Reutersvärd's part, and I don't think that we yet know about how to deal with extreme creativity. Here's Darwin and here's Wallace, two totally different people, working independently of one another, coming up with what is essentially the same story. How did they do that? I don't know.
Another question from one of the attendees. How convinced are you that there are only 5 basic forms of impossible figure?
Oh, I'd love to see more. We had some money from an Australian Research Council grant to look for different images. And there's one that we found that's at the end of the book that is not in the original collection. It's one that my research assistants made up, but weren't copying anything. They were, well, it bears some sort of connection to some things that other people have done. I would be delighted if we could find more. And well, one thing we did was we tried to pit perspective against occlusion. Okay, and we put it up on a 3D screen at the University of Adelaide, and that's pretty strange. Perspective against illusion, so occlusion, I should say. Perspective goes down to the horizon, whereas occlusion is one thing in front of the other, like that. So there are other things to be found. We've given it a pretty good shake, but I'm always on the lookout for something more than that. Yes, is a short answer. Good question.
That leads into a couple of other questions. One, someone has asked, has it been possible to make three-dimensional impossible figures?
Yeah, now let me think about that. Well, I guess no. We played with three-dimensional. Oh, yes, wait a minute, it's coming back now. Yes, I'm thinking one that somebody sent me of Escher's ascending and descending on the top of the monk's tower there. Somebody sent me that together with a 3D viewer, and he had his images slightly offset with one another. And yes, so yes is a short answer. You can get three-dimensional images in that. Yes, I'll have to think about the others that we found, but yes, you can get three-dimensionality out of it. Okay, occlusion again. Occlusion versus perspective. That's three-dimensional of a kind, I guess. I'll think about that, Joel. Thank you.
Chancellor McRobbie, you have.
Chris, just following up on the Penrose question. Actually, I remember you and I attending a lecture by Penrose when he was at ANU in the 70s, which was a...
I remember it well. Why wasn't he nicer to us?
Yes, especially to you. But the question was, while you were talking, I looked up when Penrose did the work that he got the Nobel Prize for. It was in the mid to late 60s.
Yep.
So obviously this work was done before that. But given the point that you touch on multiple times during the book about the mental capacity outrunning what's possible physically, and given the nature of geometrical insights one needs and the kinds of things that Penrose were doing, which you know more about than I do, does that say something about capacity for being able to work in areas like obviously relativity, but non-standard geometries and so on, to do at the same time also be very proficient at being able to come up with these kinds of images?
Yeah, good question. I bet it helped him, but Escher didn't think of himself as a mathematician, interestingly enough. He thought of himself as an artist. So from Escher's point of view, it's not mathematics that was helping Escher, even if mathematics was helping Penrose, and mathematics and Penrose's ability to see the kinds of things, again, made up. So I think there are people who have got an extraordinary capacity for these sorts of things, even though they can't necessarily mathematize it. So yeah, I guess that's the answer, Michael. Lionel Penrose, remember, is his dad, and
Right.
Lionel Penrose is a psychologist. And so, he must have had some mathematics, but because everybody's got mathematics, haven't they, Michael?
You would hope so.
Just have a couple more questions. That's all we have time for. One from one of the attendees who noticed that the images that you showed of Penrose version of the stairs, the staircase, they're far from convincing, but the Reutersvärd images are quite the opposite. What are the differences there?
Yeah, Reutersvärd spotted this too. He reckoned that his stairways were much better than the Penrose stairways. It was because the Penroses were trying to give depth. I think they were trying to use perspective to generate depth. So if you look at the stairway that the Penrose, the first stairway that the Penroses drew, is trying to get perspective. Here we go. Here's my hands. He's trying to get perspective into it, and it does not very convincing. Whereas Oscar again just lies back and sketches it. That picture that you saw of the 5 basic forms, it was drawn on a train when he on his way from Stockholm to Paris to take up the studentship with Leger and so on. He was drawn on a train, and he obviously just sat back and then just sketched it. And it looks so much more convincing. You're quite right, and Reutersvärd thought so. I'd like to know whether Penrose thought so, and I do not know the answer to that. But the short answer to the questionnaire is yes.
All right, and then we have one final question, which is, do you think that AI could possibly create new forms of impossible figures?
With good training, yes, definitely. Yes is the short answer. As I say, we tried for several years and we came up with some variations, but I'm optimistic that more can be done, and it's part of exploring what your central nervous system can do with this data. So yes, it's just exciting what people might be able to come up with. And every now and again, somebody sends me a picture, which is different. It's got to be importantly different. This is part of the problem. You saw the variety that Reutersvärd could get into what he was doing. That's great. But you want what you're really after, and this is what the question gets to, is something that utilizes a new principle that hasn't been exploited before from impossible figures. That's what you want, and you don't want to fool yourself into thinking that you've got something new, which is what we did. We fooled ourselves into thinking you got something genuinely new, when what it was just more of the beautiful variations that the Oscar so brilliantly exploited. Brilliant is the word.
Chris, thank you so much, and thanks to everyone for their questions. Thanks also to Chancellor McRobbie for your support of this collection and the Lilly Library,
Yes,
for many years, and also to Stephen Williams for setting up this event and everything you've done to make this happen. I'll now turn the proceedings over to Dean Dallas Comantali for closing.
Can I just say one thing? If you're one of those people that has not yet had an opportunity to look at the Lilly Library collection of Escher games and drawings, and you are within access of the Lilly Library, rush out immediately after this talk and go and have a look at them because they're amazing.
Well, wait until tomorrow. We're closed. It's it's now almost 8 o'clock in the evening. So
Okay, righto.
Yes, well, Professor Mortensen stole my line. I, I too am so pleased to hear this talk and the fascinating drawings and the conversation have really inspired me to revisit the book. And specifically, we have many of the files that were used to for the illustrations in the book.
It's
Those are
been digitized too.
Yeah, it's been digitized, and it's there's a list of these on page 143 of the book. And so maybe you all might want to note that. And an email to LibLily, which is in the chat right now, is probably all that is needed to ask to see the digital files. And I'm so pleased again. I can only thank everyone, specifically Chancellor McRobbie, for supporting our digital library efforts. And what were you going to say?
No, that's right. That's fine. That's correct. No, that's fine.
Yes. And like Joel said, we are closed now. But you can send that email right now if you'd like to see some of those digital files. But yes, it's exciting to get to see the source material for a book.
Is. Sure is.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much to everyone. And it's really exciting to be here. This is the first book launch I've been able to lead, and I'm so grateful to all of our participants. And thank you for giving us Impossible Rises.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Good to see you, Chris.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. Great for Indiana University to have gotten hold of the collection and then looked after it. That was important to gather together safely. And I think that's wonderful. And I'm delighted that Indiana University did it. Good on you. Good on you, as the man would say.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.